Hi, and welcome back to this Friday edition of Focal Point AFR Talk, free for all Friday, casual Friday. Focal Point is the program. Brian Fisher is my name. This is the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Let's grab a couple of phone calls. Let's go to Bill in Richmond, Virginia. Bill, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
I have a question.
Yes.
Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton have all kind of declared they're Christians.
Uh-huh.
Why are not our church leaders, why are not our church leaders saying you cannot have communion unless you repent of blaspheming against God?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it is interesting that, you have Nancy Pelosi, for instance, is a Roman Catholic. Joe Biden is a Roman Catholic. Kathleen Sebelius, who's the head of Health and Human Services, she is a Roman Catholic. All of them are staunch supporters of abortion. And you have a number of jurisdictions in the Roman Catholic Church have instructed their priests, do not serve communion to Kathleen Sebelius, do not serve communion to Joe Biden, do not serve communion to Nancy Pelosi. Now, the Clintons have either been Baptist or Methodists, so the reality is it would be up to those denominations and their spiritual leadership to decide how they should be properly disciplined by their own church body, but it certainly would be appropriate. Now, of course, the Methodists are not going to reprimand Hillary for anything. They've got no theological standards or moral standards whatsoever any longer. The vast majority of the Methodist Church, you still have conservative Methodist churches, and I know some very fine conservative Methodist pastors right here in this area that I've traveled with, and I know them, and they are great men of God. So they exist. They're around. But the denomination itself, very unlikely to exercise any kind of church discipline for a member of its denomination that's off the rails. And so, that's really the answer to the question, Bill. They can do it in the Roman Catholic Church, frankly, has shown a lot more moxie and character and spine to stand up to pro-abortion members who represent the Catholic Church in public life and say, look, what you're doing is completely contrary to the teaching of the church, to the moral teaching of God, and you cannot continue to come to this church and pretend that everything is okay, because it simply is not. All right, thank you, Bill. I appreciate that call. And, I haven't had a chance to touch on this, but as you are aware, there is a trial right now taking place in Philadelphia over Kermit Gosnell. He ran an abortion clinic where he did late-term abortions. It was a house of horrors. I've got a piece here written by Mark Stein on National Review Online. And he quotes from the office of the district attorney in Philadelphia in 2011, when this story first broke to the surface. Viable babies were born. Gosnell killed them by plunging scissors into their spinal cords. He taught his staff to do the same. So this is what the district attorney, and now the trial is being conducted as we speak. Mark Stein says this is a remarkable moment in American life. A man is killing actual living, gurgling, bouncing babies on an industrial scale, and it barely makes the papers. You can hardly find anything on the major networks about this house of horrors and this trial. And this is a man that killed babies by snipping their necks, by snipping their spinal cords, cutting them in two to hasten fetal demise. Stein goes on, had he plunged his scissors into the spinal cord of a Democrat politician in Arizona, then the New York Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, and everyone else would be linking it to Sarah Palin's uncivil call for dramatic cuts in government spending. But Dr. Kermit Gosnell's mound of corpses is apparently entirely unconnected to the broader culture. And then here's an excerpt from the trial this week. Medical assistant Adrienne Moten admitted this week that she had cut the necks of at least 10 babies after they were delivered. as Gosnell had instructed her. Gosnell and another employee regularly snipped the spines, quote, to ensure fetal demise, end quote. That's to make sure the baby dies. Moten sobbed as she recalled taking a cell phone photograph of one baby because he was bigger than any she had aborted before or had seen aborted before. She measured the fetus at nearly 30 weeks and thought he could have survived. You can survive outside the womb now at about 21 weeks and certainly by 24 weeks if you have the right equipment. She thought he could have survived given his size and pinkish color. Gosnell later joked that the baby was so big he could have walked to the bus stop. Now, the only coverage that the New York Times has given to this story, one story on it, and they referred to Gosnell's victims, these babies that have had their spinal cords severed, as, quote, viable fetuses. And they actually repeated a charge in their news story that this was a racist prosecution because Gosnell happens to be African American. Now listen to this piece by Associated Press writer Mary Claire Dale. Again, she's referring to this nurse Moten, the one that snipped these babies, their spinal columns. Moten once had to kill a baby delivered in a toilet, cutting its neck with scissors, she said. Asked if she knew that was wrong, she said, "At first, I didn't." And then the AP writer adds this, abortions, here's a baby that's in the toilet. And the nurse fishes it out, cuts its neck to kill it. And here's what the AP writer says, abortions are typically performed in utero. So notice she's admitting that this baby's not in the womb, but she's still calling it an abortion. This is exactly what Barack Obama did when he said whether it is a fetus inside or outside the womb. Remember when he was testifying against a bill to make sure that babies that survived abortions got medical care, he said it's a fetus whether it's inside the womb or whether it's outside the womb. If it's outside the womb, it's an American citizen. It's not a fetus. It's a newborn baby. It's an American citizen. And here the Associated Press, I mean, this is grotesque Nazi speak here. Abortions are typically performed in utero. Here is an abortion that's being performed at the bottom of a toilet. Baby's not in the womb. It's been born. It's been expelled from the womb. And there it is. And yet the AP still refers to that as an atypical abortion. Still an abortion, but an atypical one at that. Now on a piece of better news, there's a bill that's making its way right now through the Texas legislature that would close 37 of the 42 abortion clinics in the state of Texas. They would be shut down because it is a bill that would require, now abortion's a surgical procedure. This bill would require that every abortion clinic meet minimal standards for ambulatory surgical centers. That just makes good sense. This is surgery. They ought to have the same standards that apply to every other ambulatory surgical clinic in the state. Right now they don't. 37 of them are below standard. So this would require abortion facilities to have minimum requirements necessitated by any ambulatory surgery center in the state. That means that only 5 of the 42 could stay in business after this law goes into effect. There's only five of them that are currently licensed as ambulatory surgical centers. So that is very, very good news. Mississippi is on the verge of closing the one last surviving abortion clinic in the state. Texas may have a way to close all but 5 of the abortion clinics in their state. Let's go to Joyce at Geronimo, Oklahoma. Joyce, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, thank you. Well, for one thing, I'll start by reading what I've read in the dictionary here. A fetus is a noun that comes from the Latin of bringing forth. It's the unborn young in the uterus or egg, especially in its later stages. So once it's born, I would call it a born child.
Yeah,
Born child.
it's not a fetus anymore, no matter how you define fetus.
Right.
Yeah, well, very good.
Well, now my next thoughts are, since I really need help in forming this thought, we call it the Defense of Marriage Act. But what are we doing to defend marriage in the sense that how can our teenagers and our college freshmen who are seemingly having more trouble than anyone else, how can we help them determine whether or not they're progressing on a level of maturity to marry so they can be one man and one woman and avoid serial monogamy?
So your question is how do we help them become
marriage?
How do we help them become mature enough for the responsibilities of marriage?
No, not help them become, but how help them determine whether or not they are progressed to the level.
So
I can tell you immediately that I'm not progressed to be a chef. When I boil water, it disappears. So how can we have a young man and woman who want to marry or presume they're ready for sex? How can we help them determine that to defend marriage so they can avoid adultery or promiscuity, and have them decide for themselves that a marriage is worth defending?
Yeah. All right, Joyce. Well, that's a good question. And what Joyce has put her finger on is you have these larger cultural issues really right now. I mean, you've got no-fault divorce, which has made a shamble out of the institution of marriage. You have 40% now, 48% of babies that are born to first-time mothers are born out of wedlock. This is an absolute catastrophe. So we've got an entire social retooling we need to do. It needs to begin with moms and dads being very clear with their students and go to the churches to be very clear about biblical standards.